Osio, and welcome to Exploring Cherokee History. My name is Kristen Mosier, and I am the Cultural Collections and Exhibits Manager for Cherokee Nation Cultural Tourism. Today we're going to be discussing the first Cherokee Christmas celebration. We're going to be visiting with Irina Gardner, Interpretive Ranger at the Chief Vann House Historic Site in Chatsworth, Georgia. The first Cherokee Christmas celebration was held in 1805 near the home of James Vann, an affluent Cherokee. Irina, what can you tell me about that first Christmas celebration?
Hello. We can definitely start by saying it was very much still in the midst of a lot of work. They did not manage to take a single break, but that made the Christmas celebration that they did do all the more beautiful and all the more welcoming. You know, they're talking in the logs that they left behind for us to read, all the way up till Christmas. It's work, it's politics, it's farming, and then immediately the next day it's work. But I think that was a lot of day-to-day life. It was still really hard. And then to take that much extra time to decorate, to prepare food, to find coffee, to find, enough treats, to give a celebration over 100 different people, that really helped bring them together and make it that much more heartwarming to them.
Now, this celebration was really kind of sponsored or kind of put on by the Moravian missionaries, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
So who were the Moravians and who were they to the Cherokee people?
All right. The Moravians were the first Western-style school and Christian missionary to be set up within the 1800s Cherokee Nation boundary. So it was really hard, and they would not have been able to get this foothold had it not been for James Vann. He was a huge advocate for education for kids, and actually also an advocate of the morals that the Moravians would bring to the nation, even though he himself did not convert to Christianity. But he trusted them. And when a lot of other leaders within the nation did not, because they didn't speak the same language, they didn't have the same lifestyles, there was still this big mental gap, a leap towards Christianity. There was a lot the Cherokee people did not understand. But James Vann did want this education to be incorporated as part of assimilation. So the Moravians were somebody who were a religious sect from the old world that really had a lot of roots in missionary work, in conversion, in archiving, in writing things down, in memorizing the Bible, and they were also extreme pacifists. To this day, it's a faith of pacifism, and that's another way the Cherokee Nation knew they could trust them to both treat the kids well and be a good, safe fit within the nation.
Can you tell me a little bit more about James Vann and who he was within the Cherokee Nation?
Yes. James Vann was the wealthiest Cherokee at the time. He was coming out of the 1700s. His family seems to have gotten their roots in the fur trade. And then moving out of the 1700s, the wealth is somehow all of it left to James Vann, even though he did have cousins who ran their own taverns as part of the business, even though other Cherokee in his family, other Vanns in his family were marrying into other Cherokee families. Somehow he was set up to receive everything, the land, control over the businesses, and then he built land. And then he started really building his plantation. As early as 1904, he's already got a grist mill going. He starts getting blacksmith forges going, a sawmill. He's girdling trees to be cut down for croplands and for a sawmill as early as 1799. And then by the time his son, Joseph Vann, inherits the properties closer to the 1820s, they're super expanding. Joe has got steamboats on the borders of the Cherokee Nation. He's got many more taverns. They have a profit coming out of the transatlantic slave trade. James Vann is buying slaves with the intent to sell them, and so does Joe. So that is unfortunately a mark on their wealth, but it is a fact. They were that was a part of how they made their wealth, and part of how they had such a big plantation with over 100 enslaved Africans. So definitely living this Western style life, helping push his people towards assimilation, but in a more peaceful way that still allowed them to have their own religious beliefs. And he, like I said, he did himself, neither did Joseph Vann, converted to Christianity. But they were insanely wealthy, and definitely one of the wealthiest families on the entire eastern coast, but definitely within the Cherokee Nation of the 1800s.
Okay, and did James Vann have any real connection to the Moravians outside of wanting to promote those morals and promote the education that they were willing to provide to Cherokee children?
That's not really very clear to us. There's one source that you can read from the 1950s that said his father met some Moravians, but we have nothing to back up that. We really don't know where that statement came from, because the earliest Moravians came to Georgia in the 1740s. So they had been setting up missions within the state of Georgia since then, but none of them were as successful as the one that was to be set up in Spring Place by James Vann. So we're not really sure, except that he probably met with these Moravians in his business travels. They were from what is today Winston-Salem, North Carolina. It is still a Moravian archives and museum. But in the late 1790s, James Vann is corresponding with the Moravians and trying to set up meetings. And then in 1799, he's taking them on a tour of the Cherokee Nation as they go to these different places and try to find people who are try to find farms for sale. But past that, it's not really clear.
What can you tell me about that first Christmas celebration?
Well, in 1805, it really seemed to be a touching, beautiful event. They were, they had sugar candies, apple slices, ginger cookies to offer the kids. We know that everybody who attended the service got a wax candle, which, if you consider, to us, that's kind of commonplace. But wax was extremely expensive. Tallow was still expensive. So to get over 100 candles lit at night by a people who basically had no access to candles or tallow, a lot of them, especially since a lot of the people attending the Moravian services were always the enslaved Africans. So they had even less resources at their disposal. So it really, and then with all the singing and the candles lit at night, over 100 candles glowing in what is extreme darkness, without any kind of light pollution, they all describe it as being beautiful and calming and holy, and they said you could feel the Spirit of the Lord. They were filled with joy, and the kids seemed really happy. And then they were given gifts. And this tradition of giving this particular gift seems to have lasted for the next 30 years. They give gifts of printed scriptures. So that means a piece of paper that has a Bible verse written in calligraphy with a decorated edges. Sometimes we see this as a wreath, like a wreath decoration. Sometimes the wreaths are different shapes, like hearts. We have references to that. And we definitely know that Anna Rosina Gambold, who was one of the mission leaders, her husband was the postmaster and also the head of the mission, did these herself. And that's a lot of money if we think about it at the time. Parchment was not inexpensive, and neither was the ink. And oftentimes we see them making over 150 of these painted wreaths. That takes a lot of time when you're also still trying to farm in the middle of November and December, and run the school and all your other responsibilities. So they definitely took a lot of joy in their festivities. And it was a couple of days usually. One day there would be a service, a sing stunda, a love feast, and maybe the gift giving had happened the night before. So it certainly wasn't all a one-day thing. And of course, then they still had business as usual.
Well, what about the Christmas tree? Because that's usually everybody's favorite thing about Christmas. So what can you tell me about,
Yes.
I guess we could call it the first Cherokee Christmas tree?
Well, we know that people would visit the Moravians just to see their Christmas decorations, even if they weren't able to attend the services. It was so beautiful. They describe finding a tree in the wilderness, going out and finding a fir tree that they then brought in and decorated with scripture pieces that were handwritten, and also so we laid little papers. We use corn husk dolls, and it's safe to say that they could have done the same because they are husking their corn in December and preparing it in many different ways. So they didn't have a lot of finery, of course. They had pretty much no finery. They were putting all their spare money into food and providing for the kids and building new buildings and dormitories. But the trees, and then they also scattered the floors with fir branches, and they decorated the window sills. And they said over their tree, they had literally big Bible verses painted in gold in an actual banner over the tree. And it was lit by candlelight. So you can definitely imagine a gorgeous, and stuff like this. It takes a lot to clean up from. It takes a lot to gather these things. So it was definitely an undertaking.
Sounds like that would have been a really amazing sight to behold. Can you tell me what the Chief Vann House does now to kind of commemorate those early Christmas celebrations?
Yes, we bring all of the elements together. Whether or not the Moravians specifically said they had ginger cookies every Christmas or only some Christmases, we bring them in. So the entire Vann house, the two main floors, the attic and the root cellar, and all of our cabins, because we have 3 cabins that are set up like a homestead, so it makes sense, are set up with live greenery. It's a week-long undertaking. The whole process is called Candlelit Tours, and we use over 50 volunteers to get it done. And it's like on Monday, they're going out in the wilderness and clipping holly and nandina and anything that happens to be blooming at the time. Tuesday and Wednesday, we're bringing it all into the house in pieces to decorate our mantles, our windowsills. It's amazingly beautiful. We need people basically with florist background to help flesh it all out. And then on the night of the actual events, which we set up one of our other cabins with hot spiced apple cider and Moravian cookies, which is a very thin ginger, almost like a little ginger crisp cookie. And we do that because we also know that both the Moravians and the Vanns were growing apples, and we know that they were apples for cider because that was what you did at the time. You didn't have sweet eaten apples, you had tart cider apples for long-term preservation. So we can bring those elements together, and we do the same thing. We have little rolled up pieces of parchment with scriptures wrapped in a little ribbon set in the kids' room. We bring in a tree into our parlor, and we have live music. In one of the earliest Christmases the Moravians celebrated in Spring Place, they do actually have an organ working, so they do have live music. We also set up Advent wreaths. Because that is a practice that the Moravians take tradition with. We also, we do, fun little side story, have a menorah that we set up because it was donated to us. And very early on, when we didn't have a whole lot of funding, we accepted whatever antiques were given to us. So somebody gave us a menorah. And finally, our volunteers found a reference to a merchant coming through the Cherokee Nation who was of Jewish descent. So possibly James Vann could have bought a menorah off him. So we even have that set up in... It could have happened. And we also, we have, like I said, the live music. And it's only a 2-day event. We leave the greenery up all year, but the actual exploring the house in the evening by candlelight is so hard to do. We actually do put live candles throughout the whole Vann house, and over 300, and in the walkways. So our guests, it's the only 2 nights of the year that our guests can explore the Vann house in the evening by candlelight.
That's great. That sounds like such a neat experience.
We always have really a big guest turnout. Last year in the 2 nights we did over 700 guests in those 2 nights. So it's a long-term tradition. We've been doing here for more than 30 years at the Vann house. And then the whole rest of the month, guests can simply tour the Vann house with the greenery. to remind us of that time when people came into what they didn't know. There wasn't the news availability that we have today. So for all you knew, you were entering into a dangerous territory with people who spoke a completely different language from you. So it was really hard for the missionaries for those first few years. But these Christmas celebrations, these love feasts, these singstundas really seem to have brought them all together. And they can still see past all those differences and hold candles together and sit down for a love feast, which is quite literally a meal with singing and sermons, and come together and celebrate in peace. And that was a really big deal.
Well, thank you so much for visiting with me today about this. I just want to let everyone know that we do have our own version of a Moravian Christmas tree set up at the Cherokee National History Museum. It is a bit of a modern interpretation of what we believe that first Christmas tree would have looked like. And if you are able to, I encourage everybody to go and see. It's a small exhibit on that first Christmas celebration. So, Irina, thank you again so much. Big wado to you for visiting with me today. And I hope that everyone has a happy holiday season.
You too. Thank you so much, Kristen, for having me.
Thank you.